I just pressed the let's go live button, so let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plain of the internet. Before we go ahead and get started, we got to make sure the tubes are connecting themselves, of course, over to the YouTubes, also to the Rumble. We've got Locals is going, we got Twitter in the house, we've got all the connections working on this very lovely and beautiful Friday. How about that? Tremendous news. That means we can go ahead and get started. So let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Govea. I am a criminal defense attorney broadcasting from the Valley of the Sun, deep in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. And today we're talking about fairy tales. We have several different fairy tales to investigate. One is the story coming out of Ohio. They tell us one thing. A lot of people have questions about it. Is it true? Is it fictional? We don't know. But we do know that Congress has a lot of questions for our friend Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. Been under a lot of scrutiny lately, and we're going to go through a lot of that here on our first Ohio segment to shout out to all of our Ohio friends and everybody in the affected area. But we've got Marco Rubio who says, all right, enough already. It's time for Buttigieg to get out of here. Says he needs to resign. He sent a letter over to the Biden administration discussing it. He says, all right, look, enough, Mr. President. Airlines don't work. Trains don't work. Supply chains are broken all over the place. He's got to go. So we'll go into that. Pete says, well, it's not that big of a deal. We have a lot of train accidents. So what's the big deal? This is just one of many, not even a big problem kind of a thing. And then we got a photo of Pete and the Norfolk CEO, which is percolating. And a lot of people are asking questions about that. So Ted Cruz, we've got a clip from him. We had this story that I want to do a little fact check on. Some people have been commenting that this was a Donald Trump problem, that a prior administration relieved some of the rules, some of the regulations, they lessened some of the safety measures, whatever. And that's exactly what Buttigieg was saying. He said, we can only do so much. This wouldn't have happened if it wasn't from that monster Trump who insurrected the railroads, something like that. And there was a woman who goes by the name of Jennifer Homendy, and she is the former NTSB chair. And there was a great Twitter thread that she dropped for us. And she said, hey, Pete, that's incorrect. She says, saying that the electronically controlled pneumatic brake rule would have prevented this derailment is false. And she explains why. Of course, we'll go through the Twitter thread there. Now, we also learned that FEMA is denying aid to Ohio. Some interesting questions about that. Meanwhile, Biden promised aid to Ukraine. And so it's interesting to juxtapose the two situations together. What is given to Ukraine versus what is given to Ohio. Of course, we're going to play that game today. We also have China dunking on the derailment, and we're going to play this clip because things are getting a little bit spicy between these two global superpowers. And the Chinese are saying, wow, not only is the Biden administration shooting our innocent civilian aircraft, weather balloons out of the sky, but they're also nuking their own citizens. And so we'll have to go through that. Now, Josh Hawley is a senator. He sent a letter over to the Government Affairs Committee. He's demanding some inquisitions into FEMA about how this all unfolded. And so we've got a couple clips. We've got a couple Twitter threads. We've got a couple congressional letters in our first segment. And that always is stuff that makes me very excited. So that's going to be fun. Then in our second segment, we're going back to the Epstein files, baby. We haven't taken a look at our Ghislaine Maxwell mind map in quite a long time. But the story is back in the news. There is a lawsuit going on. This is not a situation involving Ghislaine, unfortunately, but there is a battle taking place out of the U.S. It's the U.S. government from the Virgin Islands suing basically JP Morgan. We're going to go through the complaint, but JP Morgan used to be run by an individual or it was closely connected with this guy whose name is Jes Staley, the former CEO of Barclays. It's a interesting commingled web of how we got here. But what we're going to do is there's an action taking place. The lawyers for the bank have filed a motion to dismiss, and the government is opposing the motion to dismiss. They're saying, no, we're going to continue to fight and go after you. And that's the document we're going to read. So we're going to fast forward through all of the heavy lifting and just take a look at the government's motion opposing dismissal, because we're going to see there were some very interesting emails between this guy, the former CEO of Barclays, Jes Staley, a British bank, and the infamous Jeffrey Epstein. Very interesting emails, and they're talking about very troubling, they're talking about nice Disney characters, but the problem is they're talking about it in inappropriate contexts, not at Disneyland, okay? At Epstein Island, which is not a good situation. So that is what we're going to go through in the second segment. So we've got that motion. It's about a memo. It's about 30 pages or so. And we'll go through all of it. But my friends, if you want to be a part of the program on this very beautiful Friday, we would appreciate you coming on over to our community and checking us out at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have a lot of fun over there. We do member-only streams, and we do member-only streams also on YouTube members. So if you want to click the YouTube membership button, you can click that button and get some of our extra content. We have a lot of stuff, cool stuff going on. Shout outs to Bonnie's over there. Facts Matters in the house. Mrs. Radice, former LEO, John McGarvey. They're all chatting it up along with Jay Cutbirth in the house. It's a great community, so come check it out. Also want to shout out our sponsors of the program here today. We've got Brick House Nutrition, which is where you can get your field of greens. It's real organic superfood. I have mine right here. It's delicious. It's got all sorts of antioxidants, metabolic combinations, fruits, vegetables, your daily servings. Simple to take, tastes great going down, and it's going to make you feel just bursting with green energy. You're going to be so vibrant, healthy. You're going to be losing weight. You're going to be doing cartwheels maybe safely around your house. That's not an FDA-approved statement. But check them out, fieldofgreens.com. Also use code Robert. Don't forget to use code Robert to save that 15% off in checkout. Also want to shout out my former law firm. I am no longer at the R&R Law Group, but they're still the best firm in Arizona, obviously. And so if you know anybody who is charged with a crime in the state of Arizona, send them over to the R&R Law Group. They're at rrlawaz.com, also at 480-787-0394. If anybody's been charged with a crime, that's the team to help. And please check them out because they do good work. All right, and so let's get right into business, my friends, and get this puppy queued up so we can attend to business. Pete must resign. That is the saying that is meandering around Congress, starting with Marco Rubio. You remember him from some time ago. He said, where the heck has Pete Buttigieg been? And he sent a letter over to the Biden administration saying, enough already. We've been following this guy. Airplanes don't work. Trains don't work. Supply chains don't work. And this guy is just out giving little lectures in front of weird halls with other people who look and sound like him, who are giving lectures to themselves repeatedly, talking about other weird, interesting issues that nobody cares about. So that's what he's been doing, and he has been very slow to respond to this Ohio derailment situation. And we have this clip of Pete, which it seems to sort of downplay the level of catastrophe that is happening in East Palestine, Ohio. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says trains get in accidents all the time. And this one happens to be, particularly bad, but it happens all the time. And so why is everybody freaking out? Let me go back on vacation.
Look, rail safety is something that has evolved a lot over the years, but there's clearly more that needs to be done because while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention,
unfortunately,
there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
That doesn't sound good. Right. It's like, this happens all the time. OK, you idiots don't know anything about trains. If you were as smart as I was and went to whatever school I went to and was the mayor of a town, and you were also appointed to this very prestigious position, well, then you would know this happens all the time. But what doesn't happen all the time that he just glosses over is the chemical nuclear bomb that went off that is going to continue to compound in effects for some years to come. So one more time, here is old Pete.
Look, rail safety is something that has evolved a lot over the years, but there's clearly more that needs to be done because while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
All right. So not a big deal. Everybody stop making so much ado about the situation. We have another clip from our Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, and he is very unhappy with Mayor Pete, says enough with this guy. It's time for him to go. We've been complaining. He's constantly gone. Nobody knows where he is. Enough already.
And I don't know what the guy needs to do to get fired because he's been asleep at the switch, no pun intended, his
Marco,
entire time in office.
little
Whether it's
Marco.
meltdowns at the FAA, whether it's what happened with Southwest Airlines, now this derailment of toxic chemicals. But his job is to make sure that not only is our system of transportation in this country reliable, but that it is safe.
And he has not been doing such a good job at that. Sort of month after month, there are continual issues, one seemingly after the other. And so Marco Rubio said enough already, sent a letter over to the Biden administration saying it's time for him to resign. Let's take a look at it. Drafted February 16, 2023 from Marco Rubio from Florida. He's on a bunch of different committees, you can see. One, foreign relations, appropriations, and so on. He sends this letter over to the president, Joe Biden, at the White House. He says, "Dear Mr. President Joe, I write to urge you to request the immediate resignation of DOT Secretary Pete, who has repeatedly demonstrated a gross level of incompetence and apathy that is detrimental to the safety and prosperity of the American people." True. For 2 years, Secretary Pete has downplayed and ignored crisis after crisis while prioritizing topics of little relevance to our nation's transportation system. It is painfully clear, says Marco, to the American people that Secretary Pete has little regard for the duties of the Secretary of Transportation. At no time has that been more apparent than the past 2 weeks. Secretary Buttigieg refused to acknowledge the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, until his intentional ignorance was no longer tenable. Even after acknowledging the tragedy, I think that was on Twitter, by the way, he continues to deflect any accountability for the safety of our nation's rail system. The circumstances leading up to the derailment point to a clear lack of oversight and demand engagement by our nation's top transportation official. Unfortunately, says Marco Rubio, this is a part of a 2-year-long pattern. During historic maritime and surface transportation disruptions in 2021, Secretary Pete was completely absent. Amidst an impending possible rail strike last year, Secretary Pete left the country to vacation in Portuguese wine country. Shout out to my ancestors. Near misses in commercial aviation, as well as recent system failures, including the one that shut down air travel in Florida in January, indicate that serious and persistent problems across the DOT are not being sufficiently remedied. I do not, says Marco, I do not have confidence that Secretary Pete is capable of keeping the American people safe. He says Secretary Buttigieg is allowed and alleged to have abused taxpayer dollars by chartering private jets that are costlier than allowed in federal employee travel regulations, including for international travel. Oh, Pete likes to fly private. Isn't that nice? Very, very convenient for our friend Pete. He is the Department of Transportation leader, secretary. So that's probably how he justifies that to himself. I do run the DOT. I'll take private. Similar instances in previous administrations have led to resignations if they had any self-respect. But Secretary Buttigieg is also alleged to have used government aircraft for travel that may be political in nature. The American people deserve to know that their tax dollars are not being abused by Pete for personal or political purposes by government officials, and that public officials are being held to the same standards regardless of their political affiliation. For 2 years, says Marco Rubio, the transparency and accountability that you promised to obsessively uphold, Joe, during your inauguration has been nowhere to be found. The incompetence and failure within your administration cannot continue to be ignored when Americans' health and safety are at risk. I hope you will change course in order to uphold your so far unmet promise to the American people by requesting the immediate resignation of Secretary Buttigieg. Sincerely, your friend, Marco Rubio, U.S. Senator from the great state of Florida. Shout out to our friends in Florida. All right, well, that's a nice letter, and I like it. Pete Buttigieg, resign, from Marco Rubio, and the murmurings ignite around Congress. So there are other questions about what old Pete has been doing. Now, you're going to hear Ted Cruz in a minute talking about less politics, more leadership out of the DOT. But there's a question about where Pete has been. What's he been doing? What's he been up to? Well, this photograph was dug up by this person on Twitter. Shout out to our friend Will of Snow on Twitter. He is a Twitter user who posted this: Norfolk Southern CEO and his buddy, Mayor Pete. Ah, very, very interesting, isn't it? Look who this is. The Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. And look who this fella is right here. That's the Norfolk CEO. Probably talking about insurrecting the railroads, aren't they? Or maybe not. Who knows? But interesting things are popping up now. Not that it means anything, but it is an interesting photo. And we have Ted Cruz, who's also in Congress, and he is having a conversation saying, look, Pete Buttigieg is in charge. It's time for him to stand up, take questions, and provide answers.
I have to say I'm disappointed by the absence of a Senate-confirmed witness like Secretary Buttigieg, who ultimately oversees the agency responsible for the NOTAM failure. And I would note that Secretary Buttigieg, in my view, instead of engaging in politics, should be focused on the job he has now and addressing the very serious transportation crises we are seeing playing out across the country.
Well, he's not doing a whole lot of that. Instead, he is making it a lot more about politics. In fact, we saw him tweet about that on his Twitter account, which is really where we've seen most of his response to this entire saga on Twitter. In fact, we talked about that yesterday. There was a very weird unification of the sides when Ted Cruz and Ilhan Omar yesterday, they were in agreement. They said Pete Buttigieg is gone, like absent. Nobody knows where he is. The mayor has said that. The governor of Ohio has said that. Everybody's wondering where he is. And he just posts on Twitter. He's like, oh, good. You two are getting along now. Give our office a call. Let me know. I'll, get off vacation in Portugal and I'll come back and I'll address something. But that has not happened yet. Instead, he is still hopping on Twitter. In fact, this is what he said when he blamed Trump. He said, all this is not my fault at all. It's Congress's fault. And if it's not Congress's fault, it's Trump's fault. And if it's not Trump's fault, it's the railroad's fault. He posted this on February 14th, on Valentine's Day, no less. Very inappropriate. Everybody's trying to love each other, and he's spreading blame around, even though he's responsible. He said this. He said, we're constrained by law on some areas of rail regulation, like the braking rule withdrawn by the Trump administration in 2018 because of a law passed by Congress in 2015, right? Trump's fault. But we are using the powers we do have to keep people safe, which kind of sounds like a whiny, complaint. Well, it's other people's fault, but we're doing the best we can with the tools we got. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to save all of you because it's Trump, right? Kind of sounds like that. Now, there was a lot of questions about this. There was, deregulation, lobbying, both parties passing rules, and it's a big question about who did what. And there are still, interestingly enough, open questions about what ultimately caused the derailment in the first place. So Secretary Pete seems to be spreading disinformation, or at least misinformation, about the cause of the derailment. He's blaming the change in the law for potentially being the cause of the accident, but he can't prove that because we don't know what the cause of the accident is. So does it have to do with what that law would have fixed or not? Who knows? But somebody who does have experience, probably a lot more experience than Secretary Pete does, is named Jennifer Homendy. And she had a very interesting thread in response to Mayor Pete's claim that this was Trump's fault and this was somebody else's fault other than his. Here's what she wrote. Before we read this very astute thread, let's understand who this woman is. This is her personal account. She is the NTSB chair alum. Right, so she's no longer on the board. Same entity that is doing a lot of the investigation here. So she's at Transport Dems, at Teamsters, Swim Bike Run Mom. She's a Starbucks addict. Hopefully she, get some help for that. Official updates and follow the NTSB. Okay, so the NTSB is where she is the alum. This is the chairman, right? This is the entity that investigates these accidents. It's a government entity. So she is responding to this. Here's what she says. All right, everybody, listen close. Here's what I have to say about the thread on the East Palestine derailment. She writes, first, a message to the community, and then a plea to those spreading misinformation like old Pete Booty. Says here, to everyone affected, know that the NTSB is working vigorously to understand what caused this derailment so it never happens again. In other words, we still don't know what this means, how this was caused. This was at 5:33 on February 16th. She says, you have my personal commitment that the NTSB will continue to share information publicly as soon as possible following this analysis. Here's a link to our February 14th update. Remember when Pete Buttigieg was spreading that misinfo? He posted it on Valentine's Day. She says, next, the NTSB investigators will thoroughly examine the tank cars once decontaminated. As always, we'll issue urgent safety recommendations as needed. Says urgent safety recommendations may be issued at any time, meaning don't wait until the end of our investigation. If we need action now, we'll tell you now. She says nothing. She said it twice, so she means it. Nothing is more important than accuracy at a moment like this. You got to be accurate. So you don't want to be the Department of Transportation Secretary just spouting off at the hip, which is why the NTSB is deliberate in our approach to investigations. Credibility is essential, unless you're the DOT, to our life-saving mission. The NTSB process works. See how here. Click the link to learn more. She says, that leads me to my last point. Anyone speculating about what happened or didn't happen or should have happened is misleading a suffering community. Please stop spreading misinformation. She says, for example, and here's Secretary Pete. Remember, here's Pete. We're constrained by the law on some areas of rail regulation, like the braking rule withdrawn by Trump, right? What does that mean? This is Pete sort of implying, if Trump wouldn't have done this, we would have fixed this, and this would have not happened, right? That's what he's implying. He posted this on February 14th. So that's a very politically charged statement, blaming Trump for this. Let's see what an actual leader and authority figure who knows how this stuff works has to say. Back to Jennifer. She says, to anyone speculating about what happened, please stop spreading misinfo. Some are saying that the electronically controlled pneumatic brake rule, I wonder who she's talking about. Some. Who is she talking about? Who could possibly be saying that? Some are saying that the ECP controlled brake rule, if implemented, would have prevented this derailment. But she said that's I think she's referring to Pete. She's not being explicit about it, but who else could she be talking about? He is the Department of Transportation head, right? And he was spreading misinformation on February 14th. Maybe they should ban his accounts from all of the platforms and debank him. So this is what she says. False. Why? The ECP braking rule would have applied only to high hazard flammable trains. The train that derailed in East Palestine was a mixed freight train containing only 3 placarded 3-class flammable liquid cars. So they weren't categorized in a way that would have made the brakes apply. She says this means even if the rule had gone into effect, dum-dum Pete, this train wouldn't have had ECP brakes. Hello. She says for a reminder of the history of the ECP, see this graphic below. And you can read through the history on that if you'd like. Somebody should send that to Mayor Pete. Hopefully he's tagged in this. She says, I urge you, okay, let our entity, the NTSB, lead the safety analysis. She's basically subtweeting Mayor Pete. She's saying, oh, shut up, please. Let us take over here. Anything else is harmful, okay? You're harming America, Mayor. Anything else is harmful, adding pain to a community that's already been through enough. But if this derailment has moved you to want to become a safety investigator and go work for the NTSB, we'd love to have you go apply for a job. That's a great way, yeah. Everybody's got to drop their links at the end of a good tweet thread. Make sure you join our community at watchingthewatchers.locals.com while you're there. All right, so very, very nice tweet thread from her. I think that was very good. Everybody just, calm down. Mayor Pete, stop blaming Trump. This was all okay, we're trying to figure out what the investigation was, the cause it was, and the investigation is not over yet. And so old Mayor Pete is having a difficult time handling this response. So that is the update from Mayor Pete. Now, another story, of course, came out. FEMA is apparently denying aid to Ohio? How could that possibly be, you might ask? Well, we turn over to Fox News and they tell us. They say this was published on February 16th in the afternoon. They write, the Biden administration turns down Ohio's request for disaster assistance after the toxic derailment. FEMA continues to tell Governor DeWine in Ohio that they are not eligible for assistance, according to the governor's office. What? How is that possible? The Biden administration, according to Fox, turned down a request for federal disaster assistance from Mike DeWine. FEMA told Ohio state government it's not eligible for disaster assistance. That's according to Dan Tierney, a spokesman for DeWine. Told that to Fox News Digital on Thursday. Tierney said that FEMA believed the incident didn't qualify as a traditional disaster, like a tornado or a hurricane, which is what we need them for. The DeWine administration has been in daily contact with FEMA to discuss the need for federal support. However, FEMA continues to tell Governor DeWine that Ohio is not eligible for assistance at this time. That is what DeWine's office said in a statement. DeWine will continue to work with FEMA to determine what assistance can be provided. FEMA said, yeah, no, we've been talking to them, but we're not giving them any money. Like, yeah, I mean, no, of course, we're answering the phone for them, but like, no, we're not sending them anything. That's ridiculous. We need that money for communities that vote Democratic. All right, and so we have more. A lot of people are questioning why Ohio can't get any federal government money when this is the situation with the White House and other countries.
And to deliver much needed humanitarian assistance as well as food, water, medicine, shelter, and other aid to Ukrainians displaced by Russia's war, and provide aid for those seeking refuge in other countries from Ukraine. It's also going to help schools and hospitals open. It's going to allow pensions and social support to be paid to the Ukrainian people so they have something in their pocket.
Yeah.
It's also going to provide critical resources to address food shortages around the globe.
Yeah, that's good. Hopefully they get everything they need. Meanwhile, FEMA can continue to deny Ohio resources. Sounds good. Perfect. And the rest of the world is also having fun with this because they are dunking on the United States. And I remember all of these statements that when Joe Biden was going to come in, the whole world was going to just stop and pause in awe at the level of sophistication and professionalism and just outright maturity and steadfast wisdom of this administration. Unfortunately, that's not really what we've seen. We sort of have the Taliban getting verified on Twitter now. We've got Russia invading Ukraine, China sending spy balloons overhead. We have the government allowing that to happen before shooting it down. It's like a never-ending joke, right? Literally like a joke. And they said that the world was laughing at Trump. This is what the Chinese are saying outright from their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He says the Nord Stream gas pipelines are vital transnational infrastructure. This is at the bottom. I can speak a little bit of Mandarin. Let me translate. He says the explosions have had a serious impact on the global energy market and ecological environment. Mm-hmm. He says if the American investigative journalist Hirsch is telling the truth, and it was the U.S. who attacked the pipelines, he says the act is clearly unacceptable and it must be answered for. He says the U.S. owes the world a responsible explanation. And he just asks a very simple question, this little Chinese communist. He says, what we want to ask is why those media outlets that have always been claiming themselves to be a free, professional, and fair, talking about U.S. media, have made few reports on the latest Nord Stream investigation. It's an interesting question. It is an interesting question. He says also, look at this. He's rubbing it in our faces, man. He says also, Why are they not reporting on such a major incident as the train accident that caused the chemical leak? You see that there? Why aren't they talking about the train accident that caused a major chemical leak?
血品泄露，危及美国居民
Which is
生命
threatening
安全
American
的
people's lives and
这样
safety.
的重大
He
事
says.
件，鲜有报道呢？据我们了
As
解，
far as we know,
这
it
样
is
的
not the
情况
first time
已
that this
经
has
不是
happened.
第一次了。
All right, so that's that little communist dictator from China lecturing us about our government. But it is amazing that they just sort of openly call that stuff out. It doesn't bode well for the ongoing relationship. We're going to see if Secretary Blinken brings that up when he goes over there, because he's having a difficult time too with them, and they're having a difficult time in this Biden administration. A rough time with foreign policy and domestic policy and a lot of other policies. But now that FEMA has denied sending money, we've got Josh Hawley, who says that is unacceptable. He is a senator from the Homeland Security. He is asking the Homeland Security Committee to convene hearings, he says pronto, which means like really, really fast. Not just fast, really, really fast. Pronto on Ohio's FEMA relief denial. What it means for states like Missouri downstream, and the growing crisis in this country's transportation. So Hawley's also sending a letter on this thing. So the train derailment story is turning into a big story. The Republicans are diving in. Rubio wants a resignation. Now Hawley is demanding hearings. So February 17th, drafted by Josh Hawley, senator from the great state of Missouri. And our red pen's a little bit thin here. Let's girth it up a little bit. All right, better. Says here, the Honorable Gary Peters, chairman of the Homeland Security Government Affairs Committee. Chairman Peters writes, Josh Hawley writes, Chairman Peters, I write to request that you convene a hearing on federal disaster relief efforts to address the transportation-related incidents taking place across the nation, not just Ohio, all of them. As members of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, we have an obligation to conduct oversight over our federal disaster response, says Hawley, specifically as carried out by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. It is imperative that we conduct the oversight to study and investigate any potential shortcomings in our disaster response and preparedness, especially those given the serious nature of these recent events. He says, as you may know, there has been significant attention and concern in recent weeks over multiple transportation-related incidents across the nation, most notably a train carrying a highly toxic and combustible chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio earlier this month, leading residents of that community to evacuate. Authorities have said that multiple chemicals are, quote, known to have been and continue to be released into the air, and surface waters and subsequent testing has revealed contamination in some of the Ohio River tributaries. But FEMA has so far denied relief, and other recent incidents have prompted similar concerns, including train derailments in Houston, Texas, Detroit, Michigan, as well as a nitric acid spill in Tucson, Arizona. Events like these, says Josh, threaten our critical infrastructure. They disrupt our domestic supply chains, and they uproot the lives of normal Americans. They also raise concerns over how the federal government responds to such incidents. The American people, says Senator Hawley, not least the local residents of East Palestine and others affected in their communities, deserve to know how their federal government, including FEMA, is responding. If there are any gaps in our efforts, it's the duty of this committee to bring them to light. Thank you for your attention and consideration. Sincerely, your friend, Josh Hawley, United States Senator. So that is going to be interesting. We'll see if they convene them. We always like some good hearings. And of course, Josh Hawley is a Republican. He's in the Republican Party, which is in the minority in the Senate. So this will sort of be up to the Democrats, who are still in control of the Senate, to make a decision about whether those hearings will take place or not. We'll see if they, do they really want to open that can of worms? I think it's much more likely that we'll see something like this in the House of Representatives at some point, but only time will tell. In the meantime, we've got Marco Rubio and we've got others demanding more from the Biden administration, including that Pete Buttigieg be asked to resign. We'll see if that happens. I wouldn't hold your breath. I'm not going to hold my breath. We'll see. but we'll continue to cover. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing and following along, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, my friends. Now, we're going to change gears a little bit. We're going back over to the Epstein saga because this one is going to get spicy. And do we have this queued up? I do believe we do. Yeah, we do. All right, let's get right into it. The Epstein files continue. We have a new memorandum in opposition to a motion to dismiss. The motion to dismiss is coming from an entity that doesn't want any litigation to continue against them. They are the subject of an inquiry from the U.S. government. It involves J.P. Morgan, and it involves this guy here named Jes Staley, the former CEO of Barclays, a bank from Britain that is sort of really involved in this because there were some spicy emails between him and Jeffrey Epstein involving some Disney princesses. What? We're going to go through the memorandum, but here's just a quick excerpt. It says Epstein accounts the same about Eastern European women. What? In July 2010, Staley, that guy, emailed Epstein saying, quote, "That was fun. Say hi to Snow White." Huh? To which Epstein responded, "What character would you like next?" And Staley responded, "Beauty and the Beast." Huh? Were they going to Disneyland? What? All right. So that's the memo we're going to look at. You can see here, we're going to go through the court docket in some detail. Before we read through the actual memo, this is from the government opposing the effort to dismiss the lawsuit brought by the government. So the government wants to keep this thing in court, and they are opposing the dismissal. But before we look at the details of those interesting and troublesome emails, let's learn a little bit more about this guy, Jes Staley, the former CEO of Barclays. And here's what Wikipedia tells us. They write that James Edward is named Jes Staley, American banker, stood down as CEO, was succeeded by somebody else, spent nearly 4 decades in the banking services, also spent 34 years at JP Morgan, ultimately becoming the CEO there as well. Problems arose. November 2021, Staley resigned amid a regulatory probe into whether he mischaracterized his relationship, with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, we covered the Maxwell trial at length here. We have the whole mind map and everything we went through. We have all of that organized if you missed that trial. However, this is not that case. This is another civil matter that's being investigated by the government of the Virgin Islands and JP Morgan. So a little bit more about him. A lot of money, a lot of time in the private sector, and there's a controversy between him and Epstein. Background, they say. In 2015, the Daily Mail published an article saying that they had seen emails between Epstein and the CEO. Epstein was arguing for Mr. Staley in financial circles, saying that he should be the CEO for Barclays, right? So they were sort of pals. Epstein was promoting this guy. Put him in charge of that, put him in charge of this. In February, they announced that there was an investigation into whether Staley was fit and proper to lead Barclays. Staley told Bloomberg that the investigation moved forward. And so there was a whole problem once these emails started to come out. What does Snow White mean? What do these different names mean? So a little bit of the background there, personal life and so on, we'll leave for another time. But I want to go through the court docket very briefly and show you sort of the technical components of this case because it has been going on for a little bit of time now. And if we start in the back, we have a summons that was originally issued. These are the parties who were involved, of course. We have the government of the United States, of the Virgin Islands, and JP Morgan Chase. So government versus JP Morgan. Government is suing JP Morgan. The summons was sent out. The complaint was sent out. A lot of it was actually under seal. We have different affidavits that are being filed. Different lawyers are submitting notices of appearance. We've got judges being sort of moved around. Pro hoc vice means that lawyers are sort of coming in from out of state. All of these different lawyers are coming in now. We have just a ton of motions for pro hoc vice. So you can see the list kind of goes on and on and on. Now we get several motions, and I'm looking for orders. And a motion, here you go. Here is the motion to dismiss. So as we get into this memorandum, this is where it basically starts. A motion to dismiss was filed by JP Chase Bank. They say there's no reason for this lawsuit to be here. It's a jurisdictional problem. There's nothing that we can, can provide to remedy this. You're barking up the wrong tree, in other words. So we have a bunch of, some time goes by and there's a response and another memo. And so we're going to pick it up with the actual memo filed here on February 15th. This is the memo of law opposing that original motion to dismiss that was filed on February 6th. All right, so enough of the background. Let's get right to it. You can see 31-page filing. This is submitted from the government of the United States as plaintiff versus JP Morgan Chase Bank. This is a memorandum in opposition to Chase Bank's motion to dismiss, the motion that was filed back on February 6th. So a bunch of lawyers are now involved, and they're trying to get rid of the case now. Filed February 15th out of the Southern District of New York. Table of contents. We'll fast forward through most of it, but you can see their defense in this case, which is the bank, JP Morgan, they're saying the government doesn't have an actionable claim. So the government is saying, yes, we do. The law applies to your conduct. We have standing. We do meet all of the elements of this type of an offense, and so on. They say we've also got counts under the CICO laws. And we have a conclusion. So let's go through it. They give us the table of authorities, and then we start with our first redaction right out of the gates in the introduction. They write, for 2 decades, this is the government speaking, for 2 decades, defendant JP Morgan Chase Bank facilitated and sustained Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking by handling and something his payments to young women and girls who were his victims and recruiters. Ooh. JP Morgan, the bank, facilitated Epstein's trafficking of victims and recruiters? Holy moly. The bank? And this is the government speaking. Let's just take a quick look at who signed off on this puppy. Linda Singer, Acting Attorney General, Pro Hoc Vice, Acting Attorney General, also Pro Hoc Vice, coming in Virgin Islands Department of Justice. Yeah. Okay, so they're all from not in the Southern District of New York, but they're suing in the Southern District of New York. And a lot of lawyers are flying in on this. All right. So now that we know who is signing off on it, let's add some meat to the bones of this major allegation. They say that trafficking, we'll just forget the S word for YouTube purposes. The trafficking was the principal business of Epstein's accounts held by JP Morgan. And JP Morgan profited handsomely from the hundreds of millions of dollars in assets in those accounts. In addition to Epstein's connections and referrals of ultra wealthy and powerful clients, none of whom are sitting in jail yet. You know who is? Ghislaine Maxwell. Far from the so-called ordinary banking services that JP Morgan claims it provided to Epstein, JP Morgan broke every rule to facilitate Epstein's trafficking and to feed off of his wealth and connections. They say, in fact, in 2008, after Epstein pled guilty to felony charges for procuring children, conduct that is trafficking under the law, the expectation was that JP Morgan would cut ties with, or at least minimum, closely monitor this person who is now a convicted felon. You know he got convicted of a pretty serious crime. That doesn't raise any red flags for you, JP? No, they didn't. It did neither. Instead, and decided at the highest level, pending Demon review, JP Morgan continued to facilitate and sustain Epstein's trafficking by making the payments covering up the trafficking, including for many years after it no longer held Epstein's accounts, which predictably enabled ongoing and future trafficking by Epstein. They were the bank for the trafficking. Yikes. JP Morgan, through its head of private bank assigned to manage Epstein and Epstein's accounts, made multiple visits to Epstein's Virgin Islands residence where women and girls were trafficked. Only when there was nothing left to be gained upon Epstein's arrest and death in federal prison did blank, 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 redacted. Ugh. So they're saying only when there was nothing left to be gained did somebody probably start creating a separation between the entity and Epstein. Only then did so-and-so call somebody and cancel the account and then call the police or probably disclose something. And, then it all started to break out. But they don't want to tell us about how the source came about. So the government says, accordingly, with all that out of the way, the government of the United States of the Virgin Islands brings this action seeking relief for JP Morgan's participation in the trafficking that took place out of the Virgin Islands. Throughout the decades when JP Morgan and blank and so handled Epstein's payments, Epstein lived in these islands and he is subject to our law. That's why they're getting involved. So JP Morgan, they write, tries to shift the blame for this onto the government. They say that the government had access to the same information that JP Morgan did. They're saying, well, you knew he was a bad dude. And they say, well, but redacted, we don't see that. And they're talking about some banking rules, right? The TVPA says you can't, as a bank, you got to be responsible, right? You can't just say, I didn't know where that money came from. No, I had no idea, that came from there. You're not allowed to do that. You say you have a responsibility. Unlike the government says you have other capabilities that we so-called don't have. Yeah, right. But they say JP Morgan had real-time knowledge of millions of dollars of Epstein payments. Many of those were being made to young women and victims. Who were the victims? JP Morgan also had real-time knowledge that Epstein was using accounts of his charitable organizations to pay off young girls. JP Morgan repeatedly identified evidence of Epstein's child trafficking and did nothing about it. They say here, JP Morgan identified something that's probably really juicy because we can't see what it is. JP Morgan had a more than close-up of Epstein's trafficking. They say there was a senior executive at JP Morgan assigned to manage Epstein and Epstein's accounts, who in this role had a close relationship with Epstein. In fact, they flew that guy to Epstein properties in the islands, hundreds of messages with Epstein from his JP Morgan email address in full view of JP Morgan, including with some photos of young women who discussed Epstein's provision of services to him during his travel on dates that closely corresponded with payments to the same young women. Oh my gosh. And discussed young girls or women procured by Epstein using the name of Disney princesses. Snow White and Beauty and the Beast, man. Ugh. Gross. So this banker, man, was really involved in his clients' lives, I guess. JP Morgan failed to avert and divert attention from its oversight is understandable. Yeah, because they don't want to get busted with different claims, right? The government is saying, we understand why you didn't report this to us, because if you would have reported it to us, we would have blasted you for violating all of these laws. TVPA, CICO, CFD, BPA claims. If you would have reported any of this, the whole web would have been unveiled, essentially. So they give us some factual background here, and these are the parts that we like. They write, between 1998 and 2013, so going back for a little history lesson, they say JP Morgan serviced approximately 55 related Epstein accounts, valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Pretty big bank account. You notice those. During this time, JP Morgan handled payments by Epstein to at least 20 young women or girls whom he trafficked and subjected to assault in the Virgin Islands and elsewhere. The payments had no conceivable relationship to Epstein's stated business interests. Epstein also withdrew hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash over that time from JP Morgan accounts, especially significant as Epstein was known to pay for massages, aka encounters, with young girls in cash. During this time, JP Morgan, the bank, also processed payments by Epstein totaling almost $1.5 million to known recruiters of victims of Epstein's trafficking enterprise, including the MC2 modeling agency, whatever that is. Among the recipients of these payments were numerous women with Eastern European surnames who were publicly and internally identified as Epstein recruiters or victims, including $600,000 to Jane Doe 1, a woman who JP Morgan's own due diligence reports stated Epstein purchased at the age of 14. Can you believe this? At the age of 14. And this case is basically dead, right? I mean, this is civil litigation taking place out of the Virgin Islands. This is outrageous. And they've got all of this evidence. And where are the other criminal prosecutions going on here? Who are all these purchasers? They got Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein's dead. That's it. Hundreds of millions of dollars floating around in bank accounts. What is our government prosecutors? What do they do over there? Oh, that's right. They're playing Where's Waldo for the J6ers. Got it. All right. Throughout its relationship with Epstein, JP Morgan's internal investigation teams identified evidence that he was engaged in trafficking, but nobody cared. He's worth a couple $100 million to your bank. In 2006, JP Morgan's Global Corporate Security Division reported that Epstein was indicted in Florida, felony solicitation of minors. 2008, Epstein pled guilty in Florida, solicitation of procurement of a minor, got the most insane plea deal that has ever been drafted in the history of plea deals. It basically immunized him, in my opinion, from future charges and prior charges. And in my opinion, it also immunized Ghislaine, even though the law didn't find it this way. It also immunized Ghislaine Maxwell and everybody, and every one of his co-conspirators. It was the most insane plea deal you've ever seen. How did he get that? I have no idea. And it doesn't matter whether it was ultimately enforceable. The fact that a prosecutor gave it to him with the foresight that it could be enforceable is nuts. I don't know what this guy had over people, but something big. Pled guilty in Florida to solicitation or procurement of a minor for prostitution, became a registered offender. JP Morgan, they continued the relationship with Epstein even after his criminal plea was reviewed and approved. It was approved by the highest levels at the bank. In August 2008, an internal email states, quote, I would count Epstein's assets as a profitable outflow for 08, parentheses, 120 million or so? As I can't imagine it will stay pending Demon review. That's probably a very high level person. Yet the assets did stay. So-and-so, blank, 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 redacted. We don't know. Because somebody approved, I would imagine, that Epstein can stay. They don't want, in other words, they're saying, I would count that we lose 120 million. I can't imagine it would stay. Yet it did stay. Why? Because so-and-so approved it. So-and-so said, well, yeah, we probably have to let that go. However, because it's like a risk, right? It's a risky chunk of money. So we got to let that go because we can't be his bank anymore because he's now a convicted sex offender and, felon. So not good. And somebody overrode that decision. So in 2010, JP Morgan's Risk Management Division discussed new allegations of an investigation of Epstein involving trafficking. Throughout 2010-2011, JP Morgan's Compliance and Security Divisions reported evidence of Epstein's engagement in trafficking, including his settlement of a dozen civil lawsuits and his payments of $1 million to the MC2 modeling agency that was engaged with Epstein in trafficking, luring girls on the pretext of providing modeling opportunities and careers. Any criminal charges for Epstein-related conduct here? I don't know. JP Morgan, through its senior executive, Jes Staley, the guy that we heard about previously, you remember him, this fellow right here, now comes into the picture. And we'll continue on with the memo as soon as we become re-energized, and learn about our friends over at Field of Greens. Because, my friends, we're going to need to be fortified and healthy before we continue on in this memo, because it gets a little bit problematic. So make sure you're getting your nutrients. We'd all like to lose those leftover pandemic pounds and be healthy and vibrant. And how sick are you of all those weight loss ads and fad diets? We've all been there. We've all done that. They don't work. You know what does work? Eating 5 healthy servings of fruits and vegetables every day. You do that, and the weight would probably fall right off. But my friends, who has time for vegetables and fruits every day, preparing it all? It's a lot of work. Instead, let's come up with an easy solution. Right on your screen, it's called Field of Greens. Field of Greens is a science-backed formula, very specific fruits and vegetables you're not going to find in any other product. Proper nutrition reboots your metabolism so you burn calories faster and lose weight the healthier way. And Field of Greens is the only brand backed by a better health promise. Yes, you're going to look healthier, feel healthier fast, but the greater proof is going to come at your next doctor visit when your doctor looks at you and says, my goodness, you've lost weight. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. So, my friends, let's go ahead and get you started. Go on over to fieldofgreens.com. Use code Robert, save 15% off. Don't forget to use that code and get your real organic superfood. I have mine. It's delicious. It comes with, this one has some caffeine in it. I have the one upstairs that also doesn't have caffeine in it. Tastes good going down, makes you feel great, and it's a great way to stay energized and feel vibrant all throughout the day at fieldofgreens.com. Don't forget to use code Robert. All right, and so Jes Staley is the CEO who is the subject of the new line of conversation in the memo. They tell us that JP Morgan, through Jes Staley, the former CEO, engaged in multiple visits to Epstein's residence on Little St. James, where the trafficking took place as part of its management of its relationship with Epstein. At the time of these visits, Staley was serving in the role of JP Morgan's head of private bank. He wasn't the CEO yet, which was dedicated to extremely wealthy clients like Epstein. JP Morgan assisted Staley to manage Epstein and his accounts for wealth connections and the referrals of ultra wealthy and powerful clients. Thus, Staley's entire job was to maintain a close relationship with Epstein so that his money, connections, and referrals would continue to flow over to JP Morgan. Keep him happy, man. He's got all sorts of referrals and $120 million in our bank. Between 2008 and 2012, Staley exchanged over 1,000 messages with Epstein from his JP Morgan email account in full view of JP Morgan, including those emails about his visits to the island. A December 2008 email shows that Staley was planning a visit to Epstein early January 2009. Around the time of Staley's visit, Epstein wired $2,000 from his JP Morgan account to a woman with an Eastern European surname. Well, that's weird. What's she doing involved in this? In late 2009, Staley emailed that he was visiting London. Epstein asked if he needed anything. Staley replied, "Yep." Period. Yep. Soon after, JP Morgan wired $3,000 from an Epstein account to the same Eastern European woman. Now, in July, Staley also emailed Epstein saying, "That was fun. Say hi to Snow White." To which Epstein responded, quote, "What character would you like next?" And Staley said, "Beauty and the Beast." Whatever that dude's into. So Epstein also emailed Staley photos of young women in seductive poses. Following the internal reports of additional law enforcement investigations into Epstein's sex trafficking in 2010 and 11, JP Morgan's response was to send Staley in 2011 to obtain Epstein's denial on which the bank hung its hat. So they're actually transferring money. And I don't know if these, if this stuff is also underage or if this is overage stuff. Like, is this general prostitution or is this trafficking in underage women? Either way, it's troubling. One of them is grossly criminal, right? And grossly, I guess my point is, I don't know if this Snow White thing is like a prostitution thing, if this is like an entity over there or what. But anyways, it's not good. The point is here, they say JP Morgan was at all times required by law to perform due diligence. They didn't do it. While Epstein was a customer, so-and-so and so-and-so did all of this. During this time, JP Morgan benefited from the wealth and the connections. Epstein helped and promised to help Staley recruit ultra-wealthy clients. And that happened. All right. So Epstein brings this guy out and he just shoves a bunch of women, in front of him. And again, like, we don't know the details of this. I would imagine, well, let's carry on before we come to conclusions. We'll get there. Epstein introduced Staley to the owner of Capital Management Company, one of the country's largest hedge funds. JP Morgan also subsequently acquired Highbridge, and that catapulted Staley's career beyond JP Morgan, right? So these guys are just sort of scratching each other's backs. In 2011, Epstein helped Staley to pitch the creation of a donor-advised fund, which would include an exclusive club, okay, with a minimum $100 million donation. Epstein continued trafficking and abusing young women and female children until his arrest in 2019. Oh my gosh. So $100 million donation to get into Epstein's exclusive club? It was only after Epstein's death in federal detention that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so redacted. JP Morgan blanked that, redacted. Don't know what that says. So JP Morgan's illegal conduct continued until 2019, caused repeated and continuous harm to the Virgin Islands and its residents. So $100 million was the entry fee, huh? So do you suspect that's what Bill Gates was paying, right, for all of that travel over there? $100 million bucks to be a part of that club. And we know what that was giving these individuals access to. Horrific. So here's the argument now. Now, a lot of this, of course, is going to be some heavy legal lifting. We'll try to fast forward through most of it. But they say the government pleads that we have an actionable claim. All right, they say, look, JP says, hey, first of all, we knew he was a risk. Yes, he was a felon. Yes, he was a predator. But that didn't cause any additional liability to our bank, right? The bank has to be solvent. And if the government comes and seizes $120 million of assets because Jeffrey Epstein, got those gains from illicit sex trafficking, that's a pretty big liability for the company, right? So they've got to make sure that their bank is solvent and none of that jeopardizes their ability to provide their services. So they said, no. We knew that Epstein was a potential risk, so we increased our liability. And that means that we were covering a potential loss. They say that's not true at all. There is no increased liability. They say that none of this stuff applies to you guys. And you see a lot of case law. So we'll just fast forward through most of that. They say even if the amendment did apply retroactively, the government says so-and-so, redacted here. They say JP is wrong about its post-enactment conduct. Yeah, and they say, so it's another standing argument. They say, okay, here's a little bit more. They say JP Morgan is wrong in saying that the government fails to allege that it knowingly facilitated the trafficking venture. Okay, so this is a little bit more analogous to criminal law. In criminal law, we talk a lot about the elements of a crime, right? And you talk about mens rea and actus reus. You have a mens rea, which is your mental state. Did you intentionally do the thing? Did you intentionally steal the candy bar? You said, I'm going to take this, put it in my pocket, and you walk out the door with it. You've got a mental state and you've got a physical act, right? Those two parts to this. Here you see a similar structure. Did you knowingly assist in a type of venture, a trafficking venture? The government alleges, and JP Morgan says, we don't meet those elements. We didn't hit those boxes. And the government says, yeah, you do. Government alleges that JP Morgan participated. They facilitated payments to women and young girls who were Epstein's victims and recruiters. You channeled funds to fund the operation, and you so-and-so and so-and-so redacted down at Epstein Island. They say JP Morgan's facilitation and redacted made the trafficking venture possible and allowed ongoing and future trafficking. So the government allegation on all four hit the boxes. And they're comparing this to an old case from, not an old case, but a 2019 case out of the Southern District of New York. They're distinguishing some cases. So they're saying, well, that case is different than our case. They have a Salesforce case here. They're also talking about, unlike Salesforce, here is different than Salesforce. And they're distinguishing the cases. They also say that JP Morgan acted with serious reckless disregard, that they would be engaging in commercial activities. Goodness. JP Morgan, they say, acted with knowledge or reckless disregard. So they either knew this was going on or they should have known it was going on and they just disregarded it and they did it recklessly. That he was trafficking. They knew that he entered his own guilty plea, and they had many other law enforcement investigations forthgoing. In 2006, JP Morgan knew that Epstein was indicted, got federal charges, and they still continued to bank with him. They say that the complaint details other law enforcement investigations of trafficking. In a 2010 internal email, JP Morgan's risk management division wrote of new allegations. Okay, so somebody goes, oh man, Jeffrey got popped again. They say, there's a new investigation popping up. Are you still comfortable with this client who is now a registered sex offender? So risk management was concerned about it, but Mr. Staley really liked his time with Snow White that one trip in Europe. And can we just pause and say ultra shout out to Crystal Hart, who invited and gifted 5 memberships to our community. Thank you so much, Crystal, for doing that. Crystal Hart is in the chat. We've got new members now. To Jay Piers is in the house. Mads is joining us. We've got AI Be Damned is now gifted a membership. Let's Go and Luann McCleary all gifted a membership. And that's a good commercial for our memberships. Thank you for supporting the community and the work that we do here by becoming a member. We appreciate you there. And thank you, Crystal, for those very generous, lovely Friday gifts. So in March 2011, JP Morgan, their global corporate security division, reported that it was aware of numerous articles that were investigating Epstein. Apparently he was doing molestation, not good. The same internal JP Morgan report pointed to derogatory information. Also talked about Jean-Luc Brunel, owner of the MC2 model management agency, luring children. All of them were, in the crosshairs of the government, but the bank just kept going. With respect to victims 18 and older, the law requires that a beneficiary of trafficking like JP Morgan had acted with fraud. The government alleges JP Morgan knew it was processing Epstein's payments and that these women were being trafficked, and that JP Morgan knew these payments had no conceivable relationship to Epstein's stated interest. Wow. That is a big statement, my friends. That is the government saying, we think we've got them basically red-handed. They knew where the money was going. They knew why the money was going where it was going. They knew that Epstein's excuse for the money was totally BS. And they knew because he had already been convicted for this type of stuff. And he had multiple investigations in other places. Nuts. We were always wondering, where was his money? And Chase Bank had it. It's crazy. After Epstein's arrest and death, JP Morgan acknowledged that receipts of payments may be victims of human trafficking. So in addition to consistent references to human trafficking, the government alleges JP Morgan's internal reports showed accounts of the MC2 modeling agency and Epstein luring victims. So the government infers that young women could have been lured by a modeling agency with the promise for opportunity. JP Morgan handled the payments and paid money to Eastern European women with Eastern European surnames and other recruiters, many young women from Eastern Europe. So there's JP Morgan is making some positions. They say JP Morgan knowingly benefited from this. It was not just a casual or causal relationship. A lot of case law here. They say, okay, some jurisdictional stuff about the Virgin Islands. And the sequence of his payments, participation. All right. And so let's fast forward through the rest of this into conclusion, our concluding paragraphs. A lot of this is pretty heavy stuff. All right. So they write, for the reasons set forth above, the motion to dismiss should be denied. And that was signed off on here by Linda Singer, who is in as pro hoc vice representing the government. Filed on February 15th, 2023. So very shocking memo there that Chase Bank was essentially the bag man, or at least one of them, for Jeffrey Epstein. And that somebody who is sort of lower up, managed the private client sector, eventually was so close to Epstein that they were scratching each other's backs that they got him into the CEO position, and he was able to help Epstein, I guess, maneuver assets around from there. Pretty amazing. Of course, we'll continue to cover this case as well. The defense will likely reply to this response, and we'll see what they say. But spicy emails from Jes Staley over to Jeffrey Epstein talking about Snow White and Disney fairy tales. Ugh, gross. All right. And so, of course, we'll continue to cover that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for liking this video wherever it is you're watching it. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. But that, my friends, is it for us on the day. And so now it's time to see what you had to say from our friends over on YouTube and on Twitter and on Rumble. And of course, we're going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com for our after party here in a short minute. But first, let's say thank you to these very generous super chats that I saw come in as soon as we get logged in here on the screen, because it likes to log me out right in the middle of a show, you know, because that's just what it does. And we love it when it does that. So let's try it again. While it's loading, let's see who's over on Rumble. We got Vianticus Prime's over there. We got Paul Blart is over there, along with user 1121 Janix in the house. Oh, hey, we got some the YouTube screen loaded. So shout out to our YouTube friends. Who is here first? Fairy tale. So Fred's here. Fred Petamonte's here. He says, Rob, a truck arrived today. Fred Petamonte has that rascally dog over there. He says, Rob, a truck arrived today. Johnny ordered 20 50-pound drums of hydrogen cyanide. Holy moly, 20 of those? Later, Timmy came over, oh my gosh, with a DOD briefcase cuffed to his wrist. I don't trust them, he says. I draw the line, no treats today. Wow, all right, so Timmy, the guy who had his balloon blown out of the sky by the U.S. Air Force, has now been contacted by Fred's dog, Johnny, who ordered hydrogen cyanide, and they got a DOD briefcase. I was thinking about how did they get that? They probably just walked up and took it from Lloyd Austin or somebody, right? I mean, they're, you know, what are they doing over there? Not too much. That's a scary predicament. I mean, I'm a little concerned that just saying hydrogen cyanide, I'm going to get a knock on the door from the feds probably at 3 a.m. this morning. So Fred, you're probably going to have an interesting night too. No treats though, I think that is appropriate. If you're feeling bad about the treats thing, don't. It's appropriate. Anytime you're going to be, your house is probably going to get raided. So, you know, maybe he learns a lesson from that. I hope he does. Good luck to you over there, Fred. It's going to be a rough night for you, my friend. And shout out to your dog, Johnny. And thank you, everybody, for those very generous super chats. Actually, we're not done yet. Where did that go? I saw another one. Alan Harkin is here. Alan Harkin's in the house with a very generous chat. Thank you very much, Alan. Alan Harkin is in the house. He says, it doesn't get better than your expert take on our usual and tragic times we push through. You are witty and see a lot very clearly. The things that many like me need some explaining, LOL. Well, thank you, Alan, and I appreciate you being here, my friend. You're always super generous, and I'm grateful for you being here and supporting the show, my friend. Yeah, it is. You know, they are unusual times. They are at times tragic times. We all are going to push through, and we're going to have some fun while we do it. You know, they are good times too. There's a lot of things I think to be grateful for and a lot of positivity and optimism out there. And we're going to get through it together, my friends. And I think that things are actually going to be looking up, you know, hopefully soon. So thanks for being here, Alan, and for the love and the support. I saw another nice one come in from our friend Andy P's in the house. What's up, Andy P? Is that Andy P from Twitter? I don't know. It might be Andy P on Twitter. If it is Andy P, either way, Andy P, thank you very much. Shout out to Andy P on Twitter. Yeah, and we had a nice shout out for Geo. So Geomancy Games, of course, he has a fundraiser, and I think the link, we'll go ahead and throw the link in the chat. And if you go over there, we did make a donation on behalf of the Watching the Watchers community. So to all of you out there who are part of our community and who support the show, we did make a dono over to our friend Geomancy, who is also on YouTube. And he produces great content over there. And so if you would like to go and support him on YouTube or over on GoFundMe, we'd encourage you to do that. Geo has been a part of our community for a long time, and he's been going through some tough times over there. And so we sent a little bit of love his direction. All right. And so if you'd like to do that, the link is also over in the chat. He's really, really close to his goal. And so any extra love that way would, of course, be appreciated if you've got the means and you're so inclined. So, and we're sending our love to you, Gio. We're hoping you're getting through this wave, my friend. We'll be here to support you as best we can. All right. And so, you're behind on the links, Rob, says V. I don't know what that means. Oh, V already posted the links. Oh, yes. Thank you, V. He's like, blah, 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 blah. Copy and pasting, man. Thank you, V. V is like Johnny on the spot with the links, and we're grateful for that. All right. And so that, my friends, is it for the YouTubes. Let's see what's going on from our friends over on Rumble. We got V's over there. We got ASSO's over there. We got Adesia 1999. MASH is in the house. Janx in the house. User 1121. Nick Danger says, I was hoping that today would be a lighthearted Friday. Now I need to take a shower. I know that was a pretty gross segment, wasn't it? Yes. And so MASH and everybody over on Rumble. Thank you to everybody joining us on Rumble. We're grateful for your viewership over there. And we're growing a nice little community over there, a nice little audience and chat, lively chat. We're grateful for you guys. And we love our free speech platforms. Let's check out what also is going on Twitter before we jump on over to our locals after party. We have 4 viewers on Twitter. Holy moly. We're almost at 5. It's going to be crazy. All right. Let's see what we have in the comments. Taking a look at what's popping out of this GIF here. All right. Yeah. So this looks good. So this comes in from our friend Paul Minot. He says, I cannot confirm or deny that I made this. The rumor, according to Annie Fragile on YouTube, is that the shy but talented Jigum made it. Oh, but I don't believe anything coming out of the chat as of late. Anyway, The meme is gold. so this is from Paul Mino at Sleepy Dog Lee, one of our master meme smiths in the community. And Geegum Geegum, of course, is another master meme smith. But Paul will oftentimes, just sort of assist with the posting on the Twitter spaces. And so that's what we're looking at here. And of course, what you see is the whack-a-mole game. And we've got Joe Biden, and we've got Hunter, and we've got Hunter, and I think that's a little cat or something popping out of there too. And they're just playing the whack-a-mole because they're coming out of the trash can, And of course, that's very talented. I don't know how you guys do that stuff, but it's super cool. And it's very great. So shout out to Geegum Geegum and to Paul Mino for our Joe Biden whack-a-mole game. Let's see. Here's a dad joke from Paul Mino in the house. Says, what's the best thing about Switzerland? I don't know. But the flag is a big plus. But love it, Paul. All right. What's the best thing about Switzerland? All right. So just for the sake of fullness and completeness. Yeah, here it is. This is the flag of Sweden. There it is. It's a big plus in case you didn't know it. Yeah, it is the best thing about Sweden. I don't know, but the flag is a big plus. All right, so that's pretty good. All right, Andy P's in the house. It is Andy P. It's the same Andy P. What's up, Andy P? He's over on Twitter. He says, gives me hope to someday be a judge. From Andy P. Oh, and here we've got this one. That's Geomancy. That's his GoFundMe. So that's the GoFundMe if you want to go take a look at the GoFundMe, which of course is also linked over on the YouTubes. And thank you to everybody who is supporting our friend Geo. Oh, this one came in from our friend Vientikis. Oh, look who this is. It looks like a very beautiful painting. Oh, who is this? Who is this very regal figure going to be from this old Victorian photograph? Let's see who this could be. Oh, let them drink vinyl chloride. Oh, it's Marionette Pete, isn't it? Let them eat vinyl chloride. Oh, they don't have water? Oh, well, there's plenty of vinyl chloride in the streams. Why don't they just go drink that? Thank you for that one. Our friend Vientikis on that one. CA Humans in the house. We got Brenda's over there. What's up, Brenda? Says that CA Humans there saying, hello, everyone. DeWine's saying it's safe to drink. Did he say it's safe to drink the water? I don't know. Yeah, good questions. Phil Reno's in the house. He says this is going to keep their minds off of Epstein. Yeah. Yeah, you get the virus, the this, the that, the other thing. Yeah, all the things distracting our minds while the country just, continues to get ransacked by these vultures. All right. And so that, my friends, is it from our friends over on Twitter. Of course, we are going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com for our after party. And if you're looking to hang out with us on Saturday, we don't do shows here, but we do member live streams on Saturdays. And so come check us out, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we'd appreciate your support there. Also want to thank our sponsors today over at fieldofgreens.com. So check them out. Get your real organic superfood. It is good. It does have a ton of good stuff in there. I was reading some of the ingredients yesterday. What's in here? Beets, strawberries, blueberries. We've got cherry, pomegranates. This is all the antioxidant stuff. For the metabolic blend, you've got a licorice powder. You've got green tea. Turmeric is in here. What else do we have? Ginger. We've got kale, spirulina, green banana, sweet potatoes, broccoli, barley. It's all in here. It's great stuff. And so get yours. Don't forget to use code Robert at fieldofgreens.com to be healthy and energized. Also want to thank my former law firm. Of course, I am not there anymore, but they are still the best ever, and they're still doing great work, and you can still get amazing representation. If you know anybody in the state charged with a crime, R&R Law Group can help you. Check them out online at rrlawaz.com. Also want to thank the mods and the meme smiths who keep things nice and orderly for us. Shout outs to our friend Vientikis Prime, K Bean in the house, Just Cause. We've got Playin' Hooky, Ronnie Cole, our friend Zulu, and of course, Geomancy Games. And you can subscribe to him on YouTube. Also want to thank our meme smith, Sleepy Dog Lee. You can follow him on Twitter. And Geegum Geegum, who may or may not have made the Wacka Biden meme for us today. Don't know. I don't know where it came from. But of course, she's amazing also. And we appreciate everybody who makes this show possible. But that, my friends, is it for us on the day. We are going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I hope to see you there. But if not, well, I do hope you have an amazing weekend and that you get an amazing amount of rest and some fresh air and some sunlight and some times with friends and family and unplug from politics a little bit so that we can recharge our batteries and come back here on Monday and do it again. And I hope to see you here so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a tremendous evening and a beautiful weekend, my friends. I'll see you right back here on Monday. Bye-bye, everybody.